Alrighty, so the 1980s didn't just give us action figures, it gave us entire worlds and universes in plastic form. The toy aisles were battlefields. Your living room and backyards were cinematic universes, and action figures weren't collectibles, they were companions. They were things that you brought and showed your best friends and compared. Uh, I'm talking about my personal favorite top 10 action figure line, but this was really, really hard for me, so I couldn't get it down to 10. So I have some honorable mentions, but I will be ranking from number 10 to 1. Trust me, this list was not easy for me to make. So this list isn't about resale. It's not about articulation stats or sculpt design. This is about impact. These are the toy lines that fired up my imagination, the pop culture that I still obsess over today. And I think some of you probably do too. So let's get into it. Before we hit the top 10, I'm going to do those honorable mentions that I discussed and give a little respect where it's due. So the first on my honorable mentions list is Captain Power and the Soldiers of Future. This is a really obscure line. I don't know if many people even know that it existed, but there was this live action TV show pre-Power Rangers that came out in the 80s that was called Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, where the toy line actually interacted with the TV show. It was light based. They had light based vehicles that there were certain flashes and stuff that would happen on the TV, and your vehicles would react to it and they would explode and fall apart. The vehicles themselves would interact with each other. It was really, really, really ahead of its time. It was probably a little too complex for kids. And I thought it was great. I loved the show. I thought it was kind of hokey and cool. I was totally in on it, but the show didn't last very long and the line didn't last very long as well. So it died off pretty quick, which is why it became an honorable mention. Secondly, we're talking about GoBots, which is like the little, cousin of the Transformers. I love the GoBots. I thought they were cool because they were Hot Wheels sized. I thought they had a lot of charm to them. They were full metal, as was a lot of toys back then when we were kids. They were these full metal die cast action figures with wild character names, and it had a pretty cool cartoon. Challenge of the GoBots was a pretty solid cartoon as well. So that was number 2 on my honorable mentions. One that you may not know about was Muscle. They're the tiny, weird little pink wrestlers. They were kind of like blind box figures before blind box figures were a thing. You used to buy them in these like trash cans and all these other different things, and they would have all these different designs, and you'd be able to collect. There was like a couple of hundred of them or something, and I don't really know how many there were. I had dozens and dozens of them. I thought they were super fun and cool. They were based off a Japanese anime that none of us knew at the time because that wasn't a thing when we were kids in the 80s, but totally to a cool line, no articulation, but they were a lot of fun. They came with a little wrestling ring too, if you wanted to, and I thought they were great. I was big into WWF, which is now WWE, back in the day, which didn't make the honorable mentions, that toy line, or my top 10 at all, although I was a big wrestling fan back in the day, but the toys just weren't that great. Next is Starcom, U.S. Space Force. So this will go into one of the themes of like what were my favorite toy lines is I loved toys that had vehicles and that you could have these big grand stories with, and that the characters that can go in the vehicles. And one of the cool things about Starcom was the action figure line was pretty small, so the vehicles were a little bit more compact and fun, but they were motorized and mechanized, so they used to like change and they would flip, things would flip up. They had like these little like magnetic spots on the vehicles, and the astronauts had magnetic boots, so you'd be able to like snap the astronauts onto the fighters and the space shuttles and the tanks and the vehicles, which was really, really dope. And it was really, really cool. I love the character designs. The cartoon, I know I vaguely remembered watching as a kid. I thought the toy line was cool enough on its own. Again, it was another one that probably was a little too cool, a little too advanced, and it didn't last very long, but I loved it. And the fifth and final one on the honorable mentions is going to be Dino Riders. We're talking dinosaurs with guns, and we're talking fully motorized. Came out by Tyco. This is a super aggressive line. We're motorized, movable dinosaurs, pre-Jurassic Park. The theme of the story was there was these alien races and human races that would weaponize dinosaurs, like make them into giant tanks. They had cannons and gunner chairs and all these really cool things. And again, the toys were kind of small, so So the dinosaurs were big, but like the humanoid characters can interact with them and sit on them, and there was all different types of sizes. They had small little pterodactyl ones that you could fly on. They had this giant brontosaurus one that could hold like 30 dudes on it. I didn't have too many of them. I had a couple. I think the line came out a little late. I think I was getting older and probably phasing out of buying action figures. And so I definitely didn't get fully into this line. And the line was like super rare, hard to find, and also like really expensive. Again, another ambitious line that probably didn't fit the budget for a lot of moms and dads' pocketbooks, rather. So yeah, that was my honorable mention. So I had to give those out there before we get to my top 10. So a lot of these toys are probably going to be in your favorite toy line, and I'm sure some of these are going to be your favorite toy line. So it was very difficult to rank these as 10. So please don't be offended if your favorite toy line is not number one. It most likely isn't. But the first one and number 10 on my line is Thundercats. That was a great line, totally adjacent to He-Man and Masters of the Universe. The bold colors, iconic characters, super recognizable aesthetics of the decade with like sword and sorcery and technology. The figures weren't perfect. A lot of articulation as some of the other lines in my top 10 didn't either, which is what kind of like probably caused them to be lower on the rankings. But it did have the vehicle aspect. They did have a huge, awesome Cat Slayer headquarters that was sick. I did not have that thing. But I had a bunch of the main characters, Lion-O, Mumra, and Thundercats is iconic, adored by people of my age. Thundercats is still pretty relevant in this day and age. A lot of people are still familiar with the property. It never really came back fully like other things that are on this list, but yeah, Thundercats is definitely on my top 10. Number 10 it is. Number 9 on my list, and you might be surprised that this is so low. But I felt this line was special, but then lacked some of that articulation that the other lines had, that didn't necessarily, speak to me. And that was Marvel's, Superheroes Secret Wars line. This was a pretty cool line. A couple dozen action figures, it had your Spider-Man, had your Wolverine, had Captain America, had all the big hitters in the Marvel universe. They were pretty static, not posable figures. They did have some joints. They came with some pretty cool accessories. I didn't get into the vehicles. The vehicles I thought were a little corny. They didn't really have a lot of anything to do with the Marvel universe. They were just kind of trying to make this to be adjacent to other toy lines that were in. But I love the core of it. I do love Marvel comics. They were my favorite comics as a kid. And it was great owning a Spider-Man toy. It was great owning a Spider-Man in the black symbiote suit toy. That was probably the number one. Wolverine, his first action figure, as far as I can remember, was in the Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars line. So there was definitely some really cool toys in here, worthy of being on the top 10, but at number 9. At number 8, not technically an action figure line, but one of my top 10 toys I played with as a kid, and that's Micro Machines. If you remember, Hot Wheels and, of course, Matchbox were always popular. I never was a big car guy. I didn't really get into Tonka. That wasn't really my thing, but I loved Micro Machines. I thought Micro Machines were great. They were super fun and cute. You can carry tons of them with you. I also love the fact that they did other things besides cars. They had other different types of vehicles, boats. They had planes. They had military style ones. They had, police, fire department. So you could have like a whole world. And because of the scale of them, they had pretty cool play sets. Again, I'm a sucker for the play set. So really great imagination, tons of fun. I really love the design on these things. They were kind of like these like little deformed vehicles. So it was pretty neat having like a little Ferrari and a little Jeep. So yeah, Micro Machines was definitely on my list. Number 8. Not a superhero line, not an action figure line technically, but definitely one of my go-to toys as a kid. All right, number 7. No surprises on my list, but this is Mask. Mask was a genius show. It took elements of G.I. Joe and Transformers and blended it into, this line of super agents that were fighting this criminal, organization, of course. And the vehicles transformed. A lot of the vehicles were based on like Camaros and other realistic vehicles, and they had all these hidden compartments, doors that flipped open as wings. There was a really cool playset, a Boulder playset, which I didn't have. I missed out on some of these playsets, even though they were super cool. But the action figure line, again, was smaller than the Joe scale. so they were a lot more portable. The mask guys had these really cool masks that went over their helmets, so it was nice that you kind of like one thing that separated that toy line for me was that ability to take like the heroes' masks off. So like, yeah, you had the Marvel characters, you had other characters, but you can actually remove their helmets and show what their true identities were, and then they can interact, and you can have a really fun story. Vibrant designs, very anime inspired cartoon. Killer opening song. If you had an opening song to your cartoon, you definitely made this list. And Mask was one of them. And I love that show. I didn't have as many of them as I would have liked. I had a bunch of the core characters from the show, but definitely enjoyed Mask. I would love to get those guys back. I don't have them anymore, but definitely miss them. All right, number 6 is pretty obscure. This is one of my personal favorite cartoons as a kid, and also toy lines, and I had all of them, and I still have all of them. I've kept all these. I'm missing a couple of vehicles from the line, but if you don't know it, I apologize, but you need to go on YouTube, watch this cartoon. It's super fun. It's called Bionic 6, and it doesn't get talked about enough. Essentially what they did was they took Steve Austin, the $1 Million Man, and the Bionic Woman, and the theory of it was, what if they had a family with bionic-powered children? And the Bionic 6, obviously, there were 6 of them. It was the mom and dad and 4 kids, and they all had these cybernetic powers. Again, vibrant designs. One of the things that I really loved about this is another anime-inspired type show before I really knew what anime was. But these were also die-cast metal. They had these really cool translucent parts that you could kind of hold up against sun or light, and they would glow. So you would see like their cybernetic powers activate. They all had different themes. There was like a sport themed one, a sound themed one. Obviously you had the cliches like the smart guy and the karate guy. So there was definitely a ton of cliches. Great cartoon. Another outstanding opening song to the cartoon. I remember loving this. I remember loving this show. Not super popular again, but definitely check it out. Bionic 6 is where it's at. All right, now for my top 5. Number 5 is DC Superpowers. This is DC done right. Again, like these characters were a little bit more posable than, not as posable as like G.I. Joe, but more posable in Secret Wars. But what I really loved about this is the character sculpts, the stylized figures. They came with cloth capes. They came with action. They came with there was definitely your iconic vehicles, like the Batman had the Batmobile. So there definitely were there. Their vehicles were a little bit more timeless. They had the Hall of Justice, which of course was insanely cool, and definitely a lot better than the Tower of Doom that came for the Marvel Superpowers, or Marvel Secret Wars line. Love this line. Had all your iconic characters, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Robin, Lex Luthor, the villains, but also had a lot of the cool like DC new gods. Like there was definitely some characters in here that you wouldn't expect to see, like Dr. Fate, Darkseid. This line had a couple of different waves. It definitely died off way too early. Awesome action figure line. I have a bunch of them still. I would love to complete this line. I probably should do that at some point in my life. And definitely have the complete set. So 100%. I thought it was way better than Marvel Secret Wars. Top 5 DC Superpowers. All right, number 4, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this franchise, and I'm going to stick specifically to this line because it was most relevant to me being born in 78. Obviously, everybody loves Star Wars, but the line that I collected the most as a kid was Return of the Jedi. Legendary action figures. To me, Return of the Jedi was everything as a kid. As I got older, I found the more nuanced love for Empire Strikes Back, and of course the original, but I grew up, one of the first movies I ever saw in the theater was Return of the Jedi. I still remember going to see it. The play sets on this were fantastic. The vehicles, I mean, you didn't have the posability as other lines, but you just had iconic characters. You had iconic moments. You could really build like this wonderful, imaginative world in your bedroom with, they had the Jabba's palace, Endor. You had so many different things, all the vehicles, the AT-ATs, X-Wings, Millennium Falcon, of course, all the iconic characters, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia. So, yeah, 100%. This line crushed it. I obviously had some of the other Star Wars toys as well, but this was the line that came out, during my relevant childhood age, so it makes the line at number 4. Maybe a little low for you guys, because I know Star Wars is a big thing for you, but like these next 3 lines were just really too epic to really. As good as Star Wars was, man, these other 3 lines coming up definitely were top. And to rank these as the 3 was very difficult. To go 1, 2, 3 on these was very, very difficult. So you might be really surprised to hear this. This is my number 3. Because as you know, I'm a big fan of Transformers, but as all the lines and all the toys I had, this comes in at number 3. Hard to believe, but I mean, these toys were absolutely amazing. Number 1, they were like engineering marvels. You had real vehicles that existed. There was Volkswagen Bugs. There was Lamborghinis. There was Porsches. These were all licensed actual vehicles. So like this line hit on multiple facets. If you were a car buff, if you were action figure buff, if you were a robot buff, like the sci-fi aspect of it, of course, like was awesome. The cartoon, one of the top cartoons, the best cartoon. Like Transformers definitely had the best cartoon out of all of them, in my opinion. Rockin' song, great characters, iconic voices. Peter Cullen as Optimus Prime. I mean, Transformers resonates this day and is by far the most successful and clandestine line out of all these that's still relevant in this day and age. Like Transformers is still huge. Toy line is still huge. Movies are coming out. There was just a movie last year. Like, so out of all these other lines in the top 3, it's definitely top dog. I know it dominates pop culture. It didn't dominate my line, because although the toys were super cool, you didn't have any play sets with it. They were the vehicles, so you couldn't really put them in vehicles. And, that was part of the fun for me, playing as a kid, was having the accessories and the vehicles. And, when they transformed, they were kind of like cool, games to you transform them back and forth, but like their playability factor of them just wasn't there for me. Like, they were kind of static. They didn't really move. They weren't posable at all. They were just kind of like cardboard cutouts of themselves. So that definitely led to it. They were more like I played with them, put them together, like puzzles, and then they sat on the shelf. I drive them around. I play every once in a while, but like they never were really dominating the battlefield of my living room or my backyard as these other lines were. All right, so number 2 is Masters of the Universe, also known as He-Man. He-Man was imagination unleashed. The cartoon was great, but the sci-fi, the mythology, the fantasy, all mashed together in one great, strange hodgepodge of fun. The figures were powerful. They were Jack, Diesel. They had tons of accessories. He-Man was definitely like everything modeled itself off of He-Man. Like when this line came out, it was gangbusters, selling. Everybody was buying this toy. Other toy lines were trying to redesign their toys to be more like Masters of the Universe. The playability was endless. The mythology was fun. The cartoon was great. The characters were fun. Just a wonderful toy line overall. Like you just couldn't ask for much more. Even though it is number 2, so you could ask for one more. Only one line could beat it for me, and we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, like He-Man and the Master Universe, just an epic line. There's still He-Man stuff coming out today. They just had there's a few animated series on Netflix that are really good. There is a Masters Universe movie coming out. So like not necessarily the dominance that Transformers has, but Masters Universe is definitely still relevant, probably more relevant than actually number 1 is, ironically enough, even though it's to me the best toy line of the 80s. But yeah, He-Man epic is the best way to describe it. Totally fun. Love it. And weird. Also weird. Just a weird cartoon. I love it. All right, so number 1, the gold standard, unmatched variety, deep character roster, vehicles, playsets, lore, cartoon, toy line, multi-marketing. We're talking lunchboxes. We're talking cereal. We're talking everything. It's been none other than G.I. Joe Real American Hero. G.I. Joe Real American Hero. G.I. Joe Real American Hero was absolutely just the perfect toy line. So number 1, you had the best scale, not too big, not too small, 3 3/4. Every figure came with a ton of accessories. The posability was there. Like you can do the elbows, you can do the legs, knees, waist, neck. Like, so you could definitely pose and play with these characters. And why that was so important? Vehicles. You had tanks, you had ships, you had planes, you had everything. Even tons of playsets, tents, bases, just insane amount of stuff. Like this line was huge. There's hundreds of figures, hundreds of vehicles. It'd be so hard to tell you what's the best one. It has what I would say is the greatest playset ever made in any toy line. That's the USS Flag, which still to this day I've never owned one. Doesn't bother me at all, but it is absolutely the best toy line, hands down. It would be hard to argue a better one. The cast was diverse. Anybody can play with it. Kids, boys, girls. I mean, obviously girls didn't play probably with G.I. Joe, but there was female characters in G.I. Joe. Cartoon was great. Even had a couple good video games. So yeah, definitely an outstanding, also had a great comic book too that's still running to this day. If anybody knows, like the G.I. Joe Rumble Hero comic book still going on now. This many years later. So yeah, that's my ranking of the greatest action figures of my childhood. You can agree, you can disagree. I'd love to hear what your favorite toys were. Again, this is mostly action figures. I know there are Micro Machines in there. There was other cool toy lines that came out in the 80s that really weren't, like Cabbage Patch Kids, Care Bears, other stuff like that. I didn't put them in here. Those are not necessarily action figures. Those are nostalgia pop culture toys too. But these were ones that you're just playing with, using your imaginations, having tons of fun. This is the 80s come to life. So yeah, let me know what you think about it. Would love to hear your opinions and find out what was your favorite toy lines of the 1980s. Remember, we're staying in the 80s. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching.